In most contexts, the words assassin and dancer don't usually go hand in hand. One word conjures images of violence and bloodshed, while the other is associated with art, beauty, and grace. In the case of Franceska Mann, these two words coexist within the same body, in a balanced manner. These two definitions only make sense when considered in the context of World War II, a violent and hostile backdrop that changes everything. The name Franceska Mann is not commonly found in history books, nor is it frequently heard in discussions about the Holocaust. However, the actions of this Polish dancer turned her into a legend. In today's video, we will tell you the story in the context in which this incredibly beautiful and graceful artist became a nightmare for the guards of Auschwitz. Welcome to Military History. Hitler and Nazi Germany invaded Poland in September 1939. This action would mark the beginning of what we now know as World War II, although at the time, few could foresee the fierce and long-lasting conflict that would result, with millions dead and Europe on the brink of collapse. At the time of the invasion, Franceska, a 22-year-old, was a dancer and performer at the Melody Palace nightclub and was well known in her country. Despite her relatively high status in her community, that popular recognition could not save her from the gravest sin that could be committed in Poland at that time, being Jewish. Franceska Mann was born on February 4, 1917, and her charm and natural talent for dance always hinted at her becoming one of the great dancers of her time. She studied dance at the Irina Prusicka School of Gymnastics and Artistic Dance, one of the three main studios in pre-war Warsaw. In 1939, she competed in an international dance competition in Brussels and finished fourth out of 125 dancers. She was the pride of Poland, considered by many to be the most beautiful and talented of her generation. When the Nazi war machine invaded Poland, she kept a low profile, despite being a recognized figure in Warsaw's artistic circles. For a while, her physical features and influence allowed her to move freely on the Aryan side of the city, while at least 460,000 fellow Jews and Romani people were detained in the residential district, which was how the infamous Warsaw Ghetto was known. It wasn't until a year after the Nazi occupation that she was forced to live in that tormenting place along with hundreds of thousands of other Jews. The Warsaw Ghetto and similar settlements in German-occupied territories were little more than waiting rooms for the extermination camps, which were in the process of being established. Even before the final deportation, conditions were already horrendous. The daily food ration for Jews in the ghetto was a mere 184 calories, compared to 699 for non-Jewish Poles and 2,613 for Germans. Diseases and hunger quickly began a torturous process of extermination. Every morning, German soldiers would collect the lifeless bodies of Jews from the streets of the ghetto. Despite how staggering it may sound, Nazi cruelty was just beginning. Humans need to believe in a better future to cope with such situations. It's not naivety, as is commonly said, but a mere survival instinct. For 2 long years, in these subhuman conditions of existence, residents clung to the agonizing hope that the promised resettlement by the Nazi authorities meant something better, that they would have access to food and shelter, at the very least a semblance of a dignified existence. However, by late 1942, almost everyone began to suspect that the transports taking prisoners out of that hellish place only meant more pain and death. Returning to her story, Franceska managed to stay relatively hidden in the ghetto for a long time, evading the Nazis who sent their people to Auschwitz or Treblinka, one of the many places that Jews were told were labor camps. However, this particular concentration camp was used solely for the systematic extermination of those sent there. The dark, but true, stories of what happened in that camp and others soon reached the Jewish population, causing panic and desperation to escape purgatory as soon as possible. During this time, there were many resistance movements within the ghetto, but there is no concrete evidence to prove whether Franceska was involved in them. People began to attempt to escape their imprisonment rather than resist directly, and some testimonies suggest that she was one of them. In the Warsaw Ghetto, rumors began to circulate about a possible path to freedom by making connections and obtaining documents at a place called Hotel Polski. However, it was precisely in this hotel where promises of freedom and escape evaporated for many Jews who were struggling to reclaim their lives. It was all nothing more than a vile and sadistic Nazi trap. It was believed that by obtaining entry to this hotel, one could pay for documents that would guarantee passage to neutral parts of the world. The most mentioned destinations for liberation were countries in South America. One of the most popular theories was that the Allied forces had been in negotiations with the Germans, and both groups had reached some kind of commercial agreement. Basically, they would exchange Jews from the ghetto for captured German prisoners of war. The Jews could obtain the necessary documentation at the hotel, and their transportation would be organized. Of course, people started making arrangements to get their documentation, but unfortunately, this was not the idyllic situation it appeared to be. It turns out that this business agreement was one of the Great War conspiracies. Historians widely believe that it was a Nazi plot to lure the Jews who had been hiding into a trap. There are some accounts that claim this conspiracy began as a legitimate agreement with noble intentions but was intercepted by the Nazis and used to capture Jews. There is also another more earthly theory surrounding this event. Some say that the operation being carried out from the hotel was designed to extract money from the wealthiest Jewish population. Supposedly, the Nazis were allowing wealthy Jews to buy their freedom at an extremely high price. One of those rumored to afford it was Franceska. Whatever the truth about the roots of the Hotel Polski affair, one thing is clear: people were given a false sense of hope that they could obtain their freedom by going to this place. While some testimonies claim that some prisoners were indeed taken to South America through this route, they were a very small minority. Like defenseless animals driven into a hunter's trap, thousands were led to a terrible fate, regardless of how much money they had or the status they held. Franceska Mann was not exempt from this fate, as she joined 1,700 of her fellow Jews on a passenger train they believed would relocate them, but, in reality, it would take them to a dreaded extermination camp. The testimonies of the few prisoners who managed to survive are chilling.
Auschwitz was hell. Auschwitz really was hell. We were on the last but one transport to Auschwitz, the last transport where all the prominents in Terezin who went straight into the gas chamber. There were about 50 of us in a kettle truck with a bucket, that was it. We arrived in the middle of the night, and in Auschwitz you could smell the fear. You really could smell it.
On October 23, 1943, their train arrived at Auschwitz-Birkenau station, carrying souls who fully believed they were on their way to a new life. Although the train stopped at this station, no one panicked because they were told that this was the last stop before crossing the border into Switzerland, from where they would continue on to South America. What they didn't know was that this was the end of the last journey that most of them would make in their lives, including Franceska Mann. What happened next is based on real accounts from eyewitnesses among the Auschwitz prisoners, including Jerzy Tabau, whose testimony was documented in the Nuremberg trials. According to Tabau, the passengers were taken off the trains and told that they would be taken separately to be disinfected before crossing the border. Then, the women were sent to the showers, which were actually gas chambers. It was at that moment, before entering the execution chambers, that they were ordered to undress, and some of the women began to feel uncomfortable and nervous, suspecting that not everything was as it seemed. As the SS men noticed that some of the women hesitated to follow the instructions, things suddenly became chaotic and violent. The guards began to beat the women with their clubs, while insulting, spitting on, and forcing them to undress. Franceska saw that the situation would end tragically, so she seized the opportunity and used her talent to distract the Nazis. Provocatively, Franceska Mann caught the attention of two of the guards, Joseph Schillinger and Wilhelm Emmerich. As they forced the prisoners to undress, Mann began to flirt with the guards using her considerable charm and performed a sensual dance while removing her clothes. When the lecherous guards approached her, she saw the opportunity she had been waiting for, and that's when she unleashed hell. With speed and agility, she removed her metal-heeled shoe and struck Schillinger in the middle of the face. The man had a bloodied face and a broken nose, so he couldn't do anything when Mann took his weapon and shot him fatally twice in the stomach, and then his companion Emmerich in the leg. This was just the beginning. Chaos erupted near the showers as hundreds of women, in various states of dress and undress, witnessed the dancers' act of bravery. Emboldened, they turned on their tormentors with brutality, violence, and courage. These may be rumors or truths, but it is part of the account of this revolt that the prisoners caught an SS officer and bit off his nose. Another rumor also tells that a second Auschwitz guard had his scalp torn off by the enraged and unleashed mob. Those who tell these stories claim that the strict medical records of the extermination camp, corresponding to the Nazi personnel, indicate the injuries sustained by these guards. These actions were made possible by the courage and irreverence of Franceska Mann, who became a legend among the camp's prisoners.
Ob das nun der Unterscharführer Schillinger ist, das war ein brutaler Mörder, der später auch ermordet wurde. Das will ich auch erzählen. Da ist ein Transport gekommen, drunter war auch eine hübsche junge Frau, und sie mussten sich alle ausziehen. Und die hat nun den Büstenhalter nicht ausgezogen. Hat gesagt, runter mit dem Büstenhalter. Er stand vor ihr, und da hat sie den Büstenhalter genommen und hat den Büstenhalter um den Kopf da geschlagen. Und schnappte sich seinen Revolver und hat ihn erschossen.
Sie hat ihn beseitigt. Sie hat die Pistole aus
der
Koppel...
Sie hat die Pistole aus der Koppel geholt und sie hat ihn erschossen. Den Scharführer, den brutalen Scharführer.
As this scene unfolded, more and more SS guards arrived to immediately quell the uprising. Of course, they had the advantage in both numbers and weaponry, so when the reinforcements arrived, the women really had no chance of resisting the fight. Many were shot by machine gun fire, and those who initially survived were locked in the gas chambers or executed. Although the women had resisted, the forces they faced were too violent and overwhelming. So, what was the fate of the beautiful avenging dancer? There are conflicting accounts of how her story concluded. Some say that she was shot along with many of the other women when the reinforcements arrived, while others claim that she took her own life with the pistol she used to kill one of her captors, denying the Nazis the satisfaction of killing her. In any case, no matter how Franceska Mann found her final fate, her actions had already been etched into the history of the Holocaust. For years, the most skeptical insisted that this story did not exist, that it was merely a legend. However, her legacy is taken up by young female artists who are inspired by her spirit, such as the Jerusalem Ballet Company, led by Nadia Timofeyeva, who stages the show Memento in her honor. It is difficult to verify the actual facts, but it is confirmed that an act of resistance was carried out on October 23, 1943, by a woman who had the courage to confront her captors. Many Auschwitz prisoners began to discuss the incident, and it spread from mouth to mouth, embellished countless times until it became a true legend. Without a doubt, this heroic action undertaken by a vulnerable woman facing certain death became the spiritual refuge for all the prisoners. A survivor of the extermination camps would write in her memoirs, "We all realized in unison that if we dared to raise our hand against them, our hand could also kill. We realized that the Nazis were mortal too." This is the extraordinary legacy of Franceska Mann, a dancer and a fighter. We have now reached the end of this remarkable story. But before we finish, we wanted to ask you, do you think Franceska Mann's story is true or merely a myth created by Jewish prisoners to bolster their spirits and courage in such a dark context? Leave your opinions in the comments below. We thank you for sticking with us until the end and look forward to your presence in the upcoming installments of Military History.